Fractiv is a hybrid effect and sampler. You can load in samples or you can record samples directly into Fractiv, which makes it a sampler that can actually sample, which is something I haven't seen a lot of in VST samplers. It's also a very powerful multi-effects processor. You can use it as a VST effect or an instrument. It comes with both when you install it. I like to think of it as the Swiss Army knife of plugins. It really has so much you can do within it, and because of that, it naturally makes your workflow a lot faster. In this video, we're going to be looking at how to use Fractiv in Nuendo from Steinberg. So let's get into it. Fractiv revolves around using sounds or samples and manipulating them. So it's important that we know how to get sounds into Fractiv. And using Fractiv in Nuendo, you have two options when it comes to dragging in samples. First, let's look at how to use the media bay in Nuendo to drag samples into Fractiv. So let's open up Fractiv and have that here. Then go to the media bay by clicking on media here and then pressing media bay, or you can press F5 and it brings up this window. I'm just going to move Fractiv to the left a bit. And so within here, you can then locate where your samples are stored. So for me, I'm going to go to my splice folder and pick a sample out of there. Now, the really cool thing about using the media bay is that you can make a selection of the sample and drag that into Fractiv rather than the whole thing. In order to do that, just click on the sample up here and it will automatically start playing. And then if you look down at this waveform, press Control and click, it'll start playing and you've got a loop there. So this is the selection, and you can use these triangles at the top to decide where the selection starts and where it ends. So I'm just going to quickly make a selection here. And now what I can do is just click on this, hold and drag it over, and it'll appear in Fractiv. You can see it's here. And if I just change the start and end points, then you can hear. It's there. So that's great. The other option is for if you have a sample or a sound already in your project that you want to drag out and put into Fractiv. You just simply go to the audio clip, press and hold, and then drag that into Fractiv, and it works the same. You can then adjust the sample start and the length of the sample. And to demonstrate what you can do once you've dropped the sample in, I've created this preset called Radio Sweeper in my user presets, and it's very simple to create presets. You just save as and put it in a folder. It's great. So I created this, and this is using the whisper that I mentioned before. So let's have a listen to it dry without any effects.
Are we dreaming?
Just a whisper of someone saying, "Are we dreaming?" And I've popped it into Fractiv, and this is what it sounds like now. And you can probably see why I called my preset Radio Sweeper. It's sweeping across the sample, and it's also sweeping a bunch of the parameters. There's distortion and some bit crushing added to it as well. And I'll just quickly talk through what I've done. I've used all of the modulators to differently affect certain parameters. So for the first modulator, I've only used a little bit of depth because I'm controlling pad X and pad Y, which is the location of X and Y on this, which dictates the start of the sample and the length of the sample. So if you look at this, then you can see that it is getting wider and it's moving along. So that's what it's doing. And I've got that going at 5.35 Hertz. I didn't see the need to link it to the BPM of the project, but you very much can do that if you just click on host. And I'm using the random wave. There's a bunch of waves in here that you can use, but the random one is allowing me to sweep across the sample randomly. The reason that I'm only doing 7% is because if I do more, as you'll see, it starts to leave where the sample is, and because I've got a short sample in here, that's not really working. So if you've got a long sample, you can go absolutely crazy with that and go across the whole thing. But for me, I've got short samples, so it needs to stay within that. And I'm also adjusting the filter frequency in the same way that I'm adjusting pad X and pad Y, and that just creates a bit more of a sweeping sound that I wanted, and I've cranked the resonance up so I can hear that. Then with modulation B, I've got 100% depth going. I've got it going quite slow. I'm using the triangle wave here, and as you can see on the pitch, it's reflecting here. It's going up and down the pitch quite nicely, and that once again adds to the sweeping. Then you've probably noticed the formant's going a bit crazy next to it. I've got it going at a sort of medium fast speed, and it's also on random. And then I've moved the formant itself up so that this is sort of its middle point and it focuses on the higher area of the formants rather than the lower. And then I've got the decimate on at 14% all the time, and that's just giving some bit crush to the sample and making it really, really messy, and that's how I've ended up getting this sound. I really enjoy it as well because using the random feature, you get a bunch of sounds which are not the same each time round. It's not constantly looping itself, it's constantly being different. So you end up with a wide array of different sounds from this one sample, which I really enjoy, and it adds to the unpredictability of what you're creating. So Fractiv is sort of working with you in that sense, more of a collaborator than a tool. The other way to get sounds into Fractiv is to sample directly into Fractiv, meaning sending audio to the plugin itself. This is great, especially if you have sounds in your project that you've processed and you want to sample them as they've been affected, so you can just directly record it into Fractiv and then work on it from there. Now, there are two ways of sampling into Fractiv. The first way is quicker and easier, but I prefer the second option, which is a bit more involved, and I'll explain why I prefer it once we've gone through them. So let's go through the first option. I have a track here where I've recorded in a scream that I've done. And I've also added in a bunch of effects, some compression, EQ, clipping, some spatial effects, and Soothe is just taming all the frequencies at the end. And I want to sample this into Fractiv exactly how it sounds now. So if you go to the mixer, if you haven't got it open already, it's the button down here, and go to the track that has the sound on it that you want to sample. And at the bottom of the inserts, just click and select Sync Audio and Fractiv. And now you've loaded up Fractiv at the end of the chain of effects. And that's important because anything before Fractiv is going to affect the sound before it gets to Fractiv. If, for example, you want to have some of the effects be in the sample but not all of them, then you can put Fractiv wherever you like in this chain, and whatever is before it will be included in the recording of the sample. But in this case, I want to include all of the effects, so all I have to do is press play, press stop, and then I can press freeze, and it keeps the sample within here, and then I can change the start of the sample and the length of the sample, and it's in there. It's fine, it's great. The reason I prefer not to do this is because I like to keep my tracks as separate as possible and compartmentalize. If I'm using a sampler on a track, I'd rather just have another track for that sampler. And also, when it comes to recording sounds out of Fractiv, which we'll get into in the next section, it's going to be a lot more difficult if you've got audio already on that track, plus you're playing stuff from Fractiv. It's just going to get very confusing. I like to keep it simple and space everything out. So in order to do that, I'm going to remove Fractiv as an insert on that track. And now the track is just as it was. So if we look up at the routing on the track, there's the input routing and the output routing. Now we want the output routing to go to a track with Fractiv on it. And it's not as simple as sending the output to another track. You can't send outputs to a plain track. You have to send it to a group track. So if you right click and then you press add group track to selected tracks, and then I'll call it Fractiv just to make it easier. And then if you look back on the track with the scream on it, then you can see that in the routing, it's actually been changed to one of the groups and Fractiv, which is the one we just created. So now if I press play, it's coming through to the group one, which is what we want. And we can use this to then send it to a new audio track. So just create a new audio track. It doesn't matter what it is. Just create a new audio track. And then if you look at the input, you can select Fractiv from the groups. And if I press record enable and monitor, and I would recommend turning this down because you're going to end up doubling the volume of the sound that you're listening to. And I've definitely found that out the hard way by just being made jump from the insane loud volume. So if we press play now, we can confirm that it's definitely coming in. So now what we need to do is add Fractiv to the inserts. So sync audio, other, Fractiv, great. And you can press mute now so that you don't have to worry about the volume doubling. All you have to do now is press play, make sure that the record enable and the monitor button is on. Press play and then press stop, press freeze, and we've got the sample in here just as we did with the other one. And now we have a separate track with Fractiv and the sample. We don't have to worry about what's going to conflict later on in the process. So this is just a nice way to keep your projects clean and organized, I would highly recommend doing it this way. And just to show you what I ended up doing with this in Fractiv, I created this preset called Scream Takeoff because it just seemed the right way to describe it. I'm not the best at naming presets, I'll admit that, but this is what we ended up with. Kind of a takeoff a bit, I guess. But anyway, what I've done is I've got all of the modulators doing stuff again, and this time modulation A is on 39% depth, and it's controlling the pitch, formant, and varispeed. I've adjusted the initial value of all of these to change where the midpoint is that it's going to sweep past, so it just gives you a bit more control. I'm using the ramp down wave, so the pitch is starting off as high as it's going to be and then goes all the way down, and the same for the formant and the varispeed. I'm also using the link feature, which I really enjoy because it sort of syncs it up with the length of the sample, and it's much more in time with whatever you're working on specifically in Fractiv. And then I've used the multiplier just to speed that up. And then for modulation B, using link again, and I've got the decimate at 50% depth just with the triangle wave, and that's already at 20, so it's just sweeping across that. And then finally on modulation C, also linked using triangle again, and I've got a low pass filter where it's sweeping this area of the frequency range, and then resonance is just cranked, which you can really hear when it gets to the end, and it's got those low booming frequencies. Now let's talk about how to use MIDI controllers with Fractiv, specifically in Nuendo. And honestly, in Nuendo this took me a long time to figure out, especially since I have an older MIDI keyboard that's not listed in the MIDI mappings that comes in Nuendo, so I had to manually set it all up. So I definitely think it's worth going through that quickly so that you can use whatever MIDI controller you want with Fractiv in Nuendo. For a quick check, I've just moved the window of Nuendo over here because I was blocking the section of Nuendo that we need to see. So just to quickly check that your MIDI controller is actually working with Nuendo, just move one of the knobs or faders and you'll see that in the bottom right corner, just next to me, that there is an orange bar that keeps showing up. If I stop, then it's not there anymore, and that lets us know that Nuendo is receiving MIDI from our MIDI controller, so that's great. Make sure that that's working. If it's not working, it could be something to do with the MIDI controller, the USB port, or the USB cable that you're using. If you want to check if it's the software or something external, then open up another DAW if you have it and see if it works with that. But it is important that Nuendo actually knows that there's a MIDI device plugged in. So to set up your MIDI controller, just go to Studio, and then if you click on Studio Setup, then click on the MIDI port setup and make sure that your MIDI controller is in here, it's visible and it's active. There's the in and out. The in is really what is important here. So now go to the MIDI remote section at the bottom here, and you can click on plus and look for the vendor of your MIDI controller. If it's a custom MIDI controller, then you can always add a vendor. But my one is Akai, so I'm going to click that. And this is where I ran into a bit of a problem because it only had Mark II and Mark III for the MPK Mini. I have Mark I, so I had to create my own. That's why it's in here. You just click add new model, enter the model name, and then put the input port as what your MIDI device is. So it will show for me MPK Mini. Now I've already done this, so I'm just going to go back, and here I have the MPK Mini. So if I click on this pencil icon here, this is what's going to show up for you, but it'll be blank. It'll just be a completely blank page without any of this. And it's really simple to set up. All you have to do is click on a square and then choose from the different MIDI parameters that are in the left here. For this, I'm doing the knobs and the piano keys. I'll just show you how to set up a new one. If you click that and then press the plus icon here, it's now added. I can get rid of that. If I want it to be a fader, a button, or anything, it doesn't matter. You can just click that and then it's there. So if I go to the first knob I've created, you'll see that it's got control change written here. And the important thing is the channel and CC. Don't worry, you don't have to know these off by heart. Just click on this button here. It's the MIDI monitor, and it's a bit more specific than the other one. If I then move one of my MIDI knobs, this is the first one, I can see that the type is control change 1 and the channel is 1. So control change is CC. So I made that 1 and I made this 1 as well, and then I did the same for all of the knobs, and it's exactly the same process. Just make sure that they're corresponding to the correct values. Once you've set this up, then you can go to the mapping assistant, which is this button over here, and then just click on the mapping assistant and wiggle the knob that you want to assign to a function. When you're moving the knob, it's reflected in the control up there. So then we can browse functions, and to make this the easiest way possible, I would recommend recommend doing it this way. Click on selected track, then go to quick controls and click on QC1. So this means that the first knob on my MIDI controller is corresponding to the first quick control parameter. And you can either double click on this or apply mapping, and then it'll appear in this section down here. Now you can do that for each of the parts of your MIDI controller that you want to use here. And once you're done, just click out of it. And this section on the left is where you can assign each of the quick controls. So as you can see, I've already got decimation and filter resonance on both of these. And as you can see, it's changing when I move the knobs. And if I was to open up Fractiv, you'll be able to see that on the decimate, I can control that with this knob. And then with the filter resonance, I can control it with this knob. So all you have to do to assign these values is go to inspector here on the left. If that's not showing, then you can just click on this button here and it will pop up, and then it will show some empty slots. If it doesn't, you can just click on this show all available slots for quick controls, then it will show them all. So I have 8 different quick controls. I'm going to choose the third quick control, so I just click on that and you can choose what to assign to this quick control. So go to inserts, go to 1, and then Fractiv. If you've got multiple inserts, just go to whatever number insert Fractiv is on, and you can choose what you want to control with this particular quick control. So I'm going to choose, just to make it simple, the out gain, and that is the output volume of Fractiv. If I now go to Fractiv and I move the third knob on my MIDI device, then you can see at the top there, the master output is changing and we've got Fractiv working with the MIDI device. And the cool thing about this now is that you've got your MIDI controller set up for these quick controls, so you can actually control different parameters of Fractiv for different tracks. So here I have the instrument track. If I click on the instrument button, I can see that something absolutely mental is going on. But what I can do is assign these parameters to whatever I want. And as you can see, they're different parameters to what I was using for the audio track. And with an instrument track, the extra thing you can do is use the keyboard. So if you make sure that this button is pressed, the record enable, and then you can use the keyboard to play notes of the sample. If it's a sample which you want to create an instrument out of, you can do that. But you can also just use it to find the right pitch a bit easier than sweeping through a knob. So that's very useful. And then I've also got the filter frequency and the resonance on the first 2 knobs of my controller. And I've got it in a bandpass mode for the filter, so I can press the keys to change the pitch of the sample and then use the MIDI knobs to change how the filter is working. So using a MIDI controller with Fractiv, to me, is the best way to use this plugin. Now, finally, what good is all of this if we can't actually get the audio out of Fractiv? So I'm going to show you how to output audio from Fractiv into another track on Nuendo and then record it so we have that sample as something we can use for whatever we want. So I've just hidden all of the other tracks so that we can focus on getting audio out of Fractiv. And if you remember early in the video, I showed you how to sample into Fractiv. This is quite similar. So we need to right click on the track and then click add group track to selected tracks. Now you can see that the audio is going to the Fractiv group. Now we want to send the audio from this group track to another audio track that we can then record. So just create another audio track, and then in the routing, go to the input routing and then select Fractiv output. So now the audio from Fractiv is going through the group to this audio track and we can record it. So if we enable recording on this track, which is receiving the audio through the group track, and then we press record, if we then go to Fractiv on the other track and then press play, and then we press stop, and you can see that now whatever came out of Fractiv is on this audio track. So if I press play, great, so you can now take the sounds from Fractiv and commit them to their own track. And now you have all of the knowledge that you need to use Fractiv in Nuendo. So give it a go and create some really weird and wonderful sounds.